The Galactic announced war, and Earth smirked like it had been waiting. The holographic message flickered across every screen in the Terran Defense Command. Admiral Merida stood with her arms crossed, watching as the Calvaxian Empire's High Chancellor delivered what was clearly meant to be a terrifying ultimatum. His triple-jointed mandibles clicked with each syllable, bioluminescent patterns pulsing across his carapace in what their xenolinguists assured her was a display of supreme confidence. "Humanity," the Chancellor hissed. "You have 72 standard hours to surrender all colonial holdings and submit to Imperial authority. Refuse, and the full might of the Calvaxian Armada will reduce your worlds to ash." The transmission ended. Silence hung in the command center for exactly 3 seconds before Lieutenant Hayworth started laughing. "Sir?" one of the junior officers ventured, glancing nervously between Merida and the still chuckling Hayworth. Merida's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Lieutenant Hayworth, would you care to share what you find so amusing about a declaration of war?" Hayworth wiped his eyes, straightening his posture. "Sorry, Admiral. It's just, they actually think this is a surprise. Like we haven't been watching them mass fleets at the Kepler staging ground for 8 months. 14 months, Merida corrected, turning to face her command staff. The fear that had briefly crossed their faces was already being replaced by something else. Recognition. "They've been preparing this war for 14 months. We've been preparing for 3 years. The room's atmosphere shifted. Officers who had been reaching for emergency protocols relaxed, settling into their stations with practiced ease. This wasn't panic. This was the beginning of a very well-rehearsed performance. The Calvaxians made a fundamental miscalculation," Merida continued, pulling up a star chart that painted the local cluster in cool blues and reds. "They assumed that because humans have only been in space for 2 centuries, we're naive, that we don't understand how galactic politics work." She zoomed in on a cluster of red markers surrounding Earth's territories. "They positioned their fleets thinking we wouldn't notice, that we'd be caught off guard." Hayworth pulled up a secondary display, this one showing dense clusters of green markers, Terran assets, in positions the Calvaxians clearly hadn't accounted for. "Permission to speak freely, Admiral?" "Granted. They have no idea what they just walked into, do they?" Merida's not quite smile widened. Not even a little bit. The truth was, Earth had been expecting this war since first contact 40 years ago. While the other species of the galaxy had looked at humanity's rapid expansion with either curiosity or mild concern, Earth's military theorists had been running war games, thousands of them, against every major power, every possible coalition, every conceivable scenario. The Calvaxians had a reputation. They'd conquered 17 species over the past millennium, each time following the same pattern: deliver an ultimatum, allow a brief period for fear to set in, then strike with overwhelming force at what appeared to be the enemy's strongest positions. It was a doctrine built on shock and awe, on breaking the enemy's will before the first shot was fired. It worked beautifully against species who fought wars the way the galaxy expected: formal, predictable, bound by centuries of tradition and honored conventions. Earth hadn't read that rulebook. "Open channel to Second Fleet," Merida commanded. "Authorization Merida 77 Tango." The view screen shifted to show Admiral Chen, commanding from the bridge of the TNS Indomitable, somewhere in the outer colonies. He looked far too relaxed for someone whose territory was about to be invaded. "Admiral Chen, the Calvaxians have declared war." "Finally," Chen replied, cracking his knuckles. "I was getting tired of pretending we didn't see their supply convoys. Do we have permission to stop being polite?" "You have permission to execute Protocol Midnight Sun." Chen's grin could have lit up a solar system. "Outstanding. Chen out." Hayworth pulled up tactical displays as reports began flooding in from across human space. The Calvaxian Armada was moving, exactly as predicted. 17 battle groups converging on what they believed were Earth's most critical infrastructure points: colony hubs, shipyards, resource installations. What they didn't know was that every single one of those targets had been quietly reinforced, turned into elaborately disguised fortresses over the past 3 years. And while the Calvaxians had been watching those obvious targets, humanity had been building something else entirely. "Sir, getting reports from the Outer Rim," a communications officer called out. "The Calvaxians are confused. They're encountering resistance they didn't expect." Quantify confused, Merida said. Their leading elements just ran into the mining installations at Kepler 442. They expected automated defenses. Instead, they got 3 heavy battle groups and what one of their commanders is calling an unreasonable number of railguns. Across the command center, officers were struggling to maintain professional composure. One actually snorted before catching himself. Merida activated the fleet-wide channel. All commands, this is Merida. The Calvaxian Empire has declared war on humanity. They expect us to be afraid. They expect us to scramble. They expect us to make mistakes. She paused, letting her words sink in across 100 ships in a dozen worlds. Instead, I want you to remember something. We invited this. Not because we're warmongers, but because we knew it was coming. And we've spent 3 years making sure that when it arrived, we'd be ready. Hayworth brought up the master strategic display, showing the entire theater of operations. The Calvaxian fleets were impressive, certainly. Hundreds of capital ships backed by thousands of support vessels. On paper, it should have been overwhelming. But the green markers representing Earth's forces told a different story. They weren't concentrated at vulnerable points, desperately defending. They were positioned like a trap that had been waiting to spring. Lieutenant Hayworth, Merida said quietly, activate the reserve fleets. On the display, new markers began appearing. Dozens, then hundreds. Ships that had been running silent, hiding in asteroid fields and gas giant shadows, using every trick humanity had learned from 2 centuries of paranoid preparation. The Calvaxians had brought a knife to a gunfight. Earth had brought a knife, a gun, and had also somehow managed to rig the entire building with explosives just in case. Admiral, the communications officer said, voice tight with suppressed excitement. We're getting panicked transmissions from the Calvaxian fleet. They're trying to regroup. Too late, Merida said softly. They're already in the kill box. Hayworth looked up from his console, and for a moment his professional demeanor cracked. You know what the best part is? We tried to warn them. 6 months ago, we sent diplomatic channels suggesting that maybe, just maybe, they didn't want to do this. They thought it was weakness, Merida agreed. They thought humans didn't understand strength. They're about to get educated. The battle that followed would be studied in military academies for centuries. Not because it was particularly close, but because it represented a fundamental shift in how the galaxy understood warfare. The Calvaxians had expected honor and tradition. Earth had offered tactics and preparation. 72 hours after declaring war, the Calvaxian High Chancellor sent another transmission. This one had no bioluminescent displays of confidence, just a simple direct message. We wish to discuss terms. Merida watched the recording, then looked at Hayworth. Draft a response. Keep it simple. Yes, sir.
What should it say?
Merida's smile finally broke free, genuine and perhaps a touch predatory. Tell them we accept their surrender, and then remind them that Earth tried to be nice about this. Hayworth began typing, still grinning, because that was the thing about humanity that the galaxy was just beginning to understand. Earth didn't want war, but it had always been ready for it. The galaxy had announced war, and Earth had been waiting.